Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a while since we got a good Mafia game, not counting the remake of the first one here, so the big question is Mafia: The Old Country something you should be interested in? Well, I played it, I finished it in one day, I had some fun, I have some complaints, but in general I think this game will be the most divisive Mafia game in the series, because some people will love it while others will straight up refund it. So join me for a quick journey through this game's 1900s Sicily that to the first Mafia is what The Force Awakens was to A New Hope. You'll get what I mean by that Star Wars reference in a moment. Mafia as a series started back in 2002, with a sequel coming 8 years later, third game in 2016, then a remake of the first one in 2020, and now we finally get a proper fourth game in the series. Previous games were located in fictional cities in the US, Lost Heaven, Empire Bay, and New Bordeaux respectively. What's important to remember is that the first game was set in the 1930s, so The Old Country is actually a prequel to that game, set in the early 1900s Sicily, as I mentioned. And it definitely stays within the world that was created over the years. There are mentions of all three cities within that game, sometimes more and sometimes less directly. Sicily being home of the actual Mafia allows for doing something different compared to what games usually did in terms of organized crime storytelling. First of all, it's the OG thing, and you can see where the Italian-American depiction of Mafia came from. It's also a bit exotic in a way, because instead of having typical American cities as the background for our stories, you get an open land full of vineyards and farms. Everything is much less urbanized. It's a great contrast to what we're used to, but I think this is one of the divisive things about this game. Using Sicily in such an early time period means that you're not getting things that you're used to in Mafia games. There are much fewer cars, riding a horse is still a regular thing. The technology is obviously much less advanced, although at the same time there's a big number of firearms. There's lots of empty spaces to travel through, there aren't that many busy places to go to, and actually the world feels less alive. I think if you have a game set in a city, you always see something going on. There's traffic on the streets, people walking somewhere constantly. Even in the first Mafia, with all its linearity, you had that feeling that Lost Heaven is a living and breathing place, while in The Old Country you get that only in certain locations. Otherwise, you just drive or ride on a road leading to a crowded place, and the journey there is not that interesting. You actually notice that the more you play the game. Now, the story of this game in many ways mirrors the first Mafia. This is what I meant by this game feeling like Star Wars The Force Awakens, repeating so many things from A New Hope. You start as a regular guy who by a turn of events comes across members of one of the families. You start very low in hierarchy, you grow through the ranks, you even take part in a race. Wink. And then there are things happening in the story that I will not be referencing because these would be spoilers, but yes, there are parallels to what Tommy Angelo was doing, although don't be afraid, it's not a one-to-one copy. Me saying that will not spoil you the whole plot. It feels like the aim here was a lot of fan service and a bit of playing it safe so that people don't hate on the game as much as Mafia 3, but to be honest, I think it got a bit too close to that 2002 game. I felt like I was replaying something very similar, just in a different setting. Sure, if it's your first Mafia game, then you won't see this issue, but if you love the original game a lot, then here comes the big question if they did the game justice by retelling a similar story, or maybe that's actually a bit forced and too much. For me, it changed over the course of the game because the first half felt hugely similar, and the second half focused more on the parts that weren't explicitly shown in Tommy's journey, but they were still there. All in all, the story was good, but at times I didn't like how close it got. What I can say for sure is that the game feels very chopped. The structure of the game also mirrors that of the first Mafia, meaning that you can theoretically stray from your given path, but there isn't much to do there. This open world isn't really filled with activities, you just follow the story that's given to you in chapters, and that I don't mind at all. I absolutely think that it was detrimental for Mafia to go full open world with third game, and I prefer the linear structure much more. However, that chopped part that I mentioned is that sometimes within a chapter you get different time skips or you're transported to a different place. Sometimes it feels like we're missing out on something that might have been playable as well at some point. I don't know, I'd say that it feels like some things were cut out of the game for whatever reasons, and it's a bit detrimental to the pacing of the overall storytelling. And mind you, I finished this game within one day. I think it took me like 10 hours to complete it. There are some interesting characters in this story and they make you feel something. You either like them or dislike them, and I think that's also a way of achieving a goal. Actually, I think there's many more characters here that you feel negative about, but it makes sense as you go through the story. What I absolutely did not like is the introduction to the game. Our character, Enzo Favara, has been sold to work in the mines as a kid, and now he has a friend there and they want to run away. Okay, that makes sense, but the way that introduction to the game is executed is absolutely horrible. The pacing is off. That's why I think some people might be put off this game very quickly and actually want to refund it within that 2-hour window that Steam gives you. The beginning of the game is just really bad. It's mostly about walking in the mines. The friend you meet, you don't really get to know that much, and I felt completely neutral in regards to him. So whatever happens in the story, I just didn't really care that much. The game definitely picks up the tempo later, and finally interesting things start to happen, but that first hour or so is just really boring. The main themes that go throughout the whole game are obviously the family, loyalty, and for some reason, a romance is in the center of everything that is happening. It is actually a very important part of the plot. I feel like it took too much of a center stage, but that's just an opinion and you might like it more than I did. Again, a divisive game. There's also something off with the tempo of the game by the end of it. Suddenly things happen that you think lead to an end, but then when it feels like this is the end, it's actually not, and you still have like 2 chapters to go. I'm pretty happy with the conclusion of the game, although that might not be the best choice of words, happy. For obvious reasons, I won't tell you how it ends, but in general, I feel that it made sense, and it also leaves the door open for exploring something still between that game and Mafia 1. I hope they actually do another one in the future and connect these worlds even closer. Now, what can you expect gameplay-wise? Like I said, the missions are pretty linear, so it's mostly about going from point A to B, doing stuff, and sometimes coming back to the villa where the Teresi family lives. You have everything in third person, combat is ranged with revolvers, pistols, rifles, shotguns, and knives. Actually, knives play a big part in the game. First of all, you can use them for opening lockboxes or locks on some closed doors, as well as during stealth takedowns. However, the biggest thing is actually knife fights, because of the Sicilian traditional martial art. It boils down to using slashes, thrusts, and strikes, parrying and dodging proper attacks. There's obviously counter-attacking if you time it right. It's aimed to be very cinematic, and for the first 3-4 times you do that, it's actually pretty fun. But there are lots of these fights throughout the whole game, and there's nothing new about them at a certain point, so it just gets boring. Imagine as if you take the final sword combat from Uncharted 4 and actually put it like 15 times throughout the game. The structure of every fight is also similar. Once you get to either 1/3 or half of an enemy's health bar, you get a brief cutscene, and then it looks like the new phase of that boss fight starts, but it's almost no different to the previous one. So a fun addition, but there's just too much of it. Gunplay in this game is okay. There's a definite difference between weapons you choose. You can always carry a sidearm and a bigger gun with you. You loot ammo conveniently placed throughout the levels or from the enemies you take down. Enemies tend to be pretty accurate if you stick out of cover for too long, but their AI is not the brightest. Often enemies will try to push straight towards you, sometimes from your side, but not really coordinating their attacks. There are also some throwables that you can use, coins or bottles in stealth gameplay to get your enemies to move, and grenades in regular combat. Though I have to say that I only used grenades once to test how they work, otherwise I absolutely did not need them, and I completely forgot that I'm carrying something like this. The gameplay loop is solid for a cover shooter, but there's definitely nothing groundbreaking here. If you played the remake of the first Mafia, I'd say it feels very similar to that, and for me that's actually enough to just enjoy the story with gameplay not being a nuisance. Just don't expect too much depth here. Since the game has 2 main travel methods, horses and cars, you can choose whatever you feel like. It doesn't make a lot of difference in the game. You either ride a horse that has this really crappy mechanic of boosting. As you can see, you have these spurs icons in the bottom right, and if you press a proper key, there's this anime-like way of showing that your horse is now fast and it actually runs quicker for a while. These icons are on cooldown, but if you press the button again before the icon fills up completely, it resets the progress on its cooldown. It's not fun at all. Cars, on the other hand, are very crude machines at this point in time. They drive and they're pretty slow uphill, as expected, but because you take part in a race, you also get access to a much faster machine that has no business in driving this fast on these kinds of roads. It's also sliding uncontrollably if you don't pay attention, so make sure to pay attention. Though I have to admit that I actually didn't mind driving cars here, but it is very arcadey. There is an option to turn on more simulation-style driving without vehicle handling assistance in the options, but I didn't really try it out. I was okay with how cars behaved here, and to be honest, I finished this game more quickly than I expected, so yeah. I previously mentioned that because this game is not set in a city, there's a lot of empty spaces, and the level design here is definitely missing something meaningful, and you can actually tell that by the fact that you can skip a lot of rides to your destination. Sometimes the game even gives you that option while the characters are talking, so for me it feels like they're saying you won't learn anything useful during that ride, it's only here because we need to give you something to do. So that's a bummer. Also, in a typical Mafia manner, you don't really get time to explore on your own because you always have a mission objective in a chapter leading you somewhere, and sometimes if you just try to walk away from an area, the game will tell you that you need to go back before the timer reaches 0. So that's basically saying that the open world here is not really in any way meaningful. Though it has to be said that if you want to play in this world a bit more, you can choose Explore from the chapter replay menu. The part of Sicily we have access to looks really nice though. The fields, the vineyards, the mountains, the really cool streets of San Celeste. The Sicilian vibe is really strong here, and it's just fun to look at these places. I've actually been to Italy once but did not have time to sightsee, and this game makes me want to visit Italy and Sicily just like Ezio's Assassin's Creed trilogy did. Oh, speaking of Ezio, you remember how in those Assassin's Creed games characters were speaking with this really over-the-top Italian accent? For some reason it didn't bother me there, maybe because it was a very fantasy version of our world, unless I'm missing the existence of an animus in real life. However, the old country positions itself as a very real-life grounded story about people in the criminal underworld, and hearing those overly Italian accents in English on every character in the game actually felt a bit out of place.
That is enough for me.
Come on, old man. We'll head into town.
When you have a wife, children, you will understand.
You think any woman would have him?
If he's lucky, he'll meet a girl who is deaf, dumb, and blind.
Forget about him. I think Valentina keeps his balls in a little bag by the bed.
Some of you won't be bothered by this, for the most part I didn't mind either, but sometimes it was just too much of a stereotypical Italian way of speaking, just like Ezio's Uncle Mario.
Do I know you from somewhere? Don't you recognize me? It's me, Mario!
Uncle Mario?
The game has a system of upgrades. You basically collect charms that you put on your rosary, and they work like passives, for example giving you better accuracy and ability to carry more ammo for a certain type of weapon. To be honest, it feels like an afterthought. It doesn't influence gameplay that heavily, and it doesn't make much sense why it's actually a rosary. Enzo is not an overly religious person. I don't think that his rosary ever takes an important place in any cutscene. I don't think I was even aware that he's carrying a rosary. You just see a cross on his neck. The passives do something, but not too much, so you won't be getting back to changing your beats on the rosary too often. You can also buy more types of guns, customizations for your clothes and means of transportation, as well as various knives that have different passives, and they actually change a lot. One type of knife might allow for ranged takedowns, while the other allows for instant looting after killing an enemy with that knife. Still, I bought a knife when I had the first chance, and I never got a different one throughout the whole game. I think it's also important to note that performance-wise the game had some issues. In a typical Unreal Engine manner, there were FPS drops, commonly when going from gameplay into cutscene or when transitioning between areas, like squeezing through something. Pretty often some textures still finished loading in front of me. It wasn't the case of the whole buildings loading in, more like the final surface details appearing at the last second, but it was noticeable. Otherwise, the game looks really nice, especially in proper lighting, but that's what we expect from Unreal. But I actually expect people complaining about performance issues on PC, and I hope they fix it quickly. Also, I have no idea how the console version runs because we only got access to the PC build. Okay, but how about this being a part of the series that so many people like, especially the first and second game? Does this feel like a game for the fans of Mafia? And here again, I don't think I have a very definitive answer. On one hand, it tells a very Mafia-like story that you would expect from this kind of game. On the other, the setting is widely different from what I personally liked about these games. Gameplay loop is kind of similar, but at the same time, the time period limitations really influence how you play this game, and not everyone will like that. Characters like our mentor Luca or Don Torisi are actually really well depicted and nicely written, but at the same time the, let's call them villains for the lack of a better word, are pretty bland. The main protagonist, Enzo, also has less of a defined character, which makes him not as interesting as Tommy Angelo or Vito Scaletta, but the change that occurs in him throughout the story is interesting to follow. Although at the same time it feels like Mafia really wanted to emulate the idea of The Last of Us 2, criticizing the never-ending cycle of violence, I don't know, it's really hard for me to give you a solid answer that you will like or will dislike this game, and that's exactly why I feel like this Mafia will be very divisive for the players. It's actually interesting to say these kinds of things when you have no idea what other people think of this game yet, so this might age really badly, really quickly, but hey, that's how I feel about Mafia: The Old Country. Personally, I gotta say, I kind of liked it, but I liked it in a way that in 2 weeks' time I won't really remember much about this game. It's not something I extremely enjoyed, it's probably not something that I want to replay in the future, but I don't think that I wasted my time on it. I hope that this game performs well enough that there will be another entry in the series, though I think I'd like it to go back to America, sticking to the 30s or 40s again. Thank you for watching, take care.